In 1428, Masaccio painted scenes from the life of St. Peter for the Brancacci Chapel in Santa Maria del Carmine in Florence. Among those listening to Peter's sermon is Masaccio himself. His biographer, the painter Giorgio Vasari, recounts that he created his own portrait with the help of a mirror. Half a century later, in an epiphany where the Magi bear the features of the Medici family, Botticelli includes a self-portrait at the edge of the scene. Around the same time, Dürer depicts himself at the center of the martyrdom of the 10 Christians, or at the edge of the adoration of the Holy Trinity. He also portrays himself as the sole protagonist. Within a century, the anonymous artisan painter had transformed into a figure who mingles with princes, dares to depict himself as one of them, and signs his own works. By the 16th century, self-portraiture had become a legitimate genre within art. Painters such as Raphael, Parmigianino, Titian, and Tintoretto developed it. However, in Rembrandt's case, self-portraiture became a constant activity from the age of 20 until his death at 63. Throughout his life, the painter drew, engraved, and painted his own face nearly 100 times. From his earliest works in 1625 to 1626, Rembrandt depicted himself in religious scenes. In the stoning of St. Stephen, he appears among the crowd alongside his friend, the painter Jan Lievens. He also created an unidentified scene from ancient history or the Old Testament in which the young Rembrandt appears behind the king's scepter. Later, once established in Amsterdam and soon famous, he portrayed himself with his wife Saskia in Renaissance attire. In this image, Rembrandt raises his glass in laughter at a well-set table, depicting himself as a tavern drinker with a prostitute on his lap. This scene illustrates the parable of the prodigal son squandering his fortune, but it is also an ironic warning against the temptations of wealth. Around the same time, inspired by Rubens, who was then the most renowned painter, Rembrandt painted The Raising of the Cross. In this work, he placed himself at the center of the composition, among those crucifying Christ. His art developed in a world shaped by the various religions of the book. Although he could be considered a freethinker, far removed from the churches, Rembrandt was deeply immersed in spiritual tradition. His paintings are filled with hermits, philosophers, sages, magicians, priests, prophets, and saints. Like these figures, the painter portrayed himself in all sorts of costumes and poses, but his unique use of light, drawn from Caravaggio, took on a new meaning. In Rembrandt's work, chiaroscuro is not just a dramatic effect, it becomes a way to suggest emotional intensity, revelation, and meditation. The self-portrait can be seen as a counterpoint to vanity. The image of oneself gazing at vanity is reflected in the mirror, an object that, from the 14th century onward, became a common household item. The mirror intrigued both painters and scholars. Scientists discovered in it the paradoxes of symmetry and infinity. Painters, the paradoxes of representation and reflective observation. An Austrian painter contemporary to Rembrandt, Johannes Gump, revealed the artifice of the self-portrait. In his painting, he places himself simultaneously at the axis of the mirror and the canvas, and in order to observe his own reflection, he must turn his head and eyes. That is how he paints himself. His dog and cat, shown threatening each other in the scene, may symbolize the artist's internal struggle to capture his own image. The canvas, in turn, becomes a mirror. The viewer has the impression of being watched by the painter. However, the paradox of the self-portrait lies in the fact that the reflected image is reversed. The left side, painted as it truly is, appears to the viewer as the right side of the face. Since faces are rarely symmetrical, the image in a self-portrait is always deceptive. If the painter depicts himself at work, he must face another consequence of this paradox. Right-handed artists hold the palette in their left hand and the brush in their right. But in the mirror, this relationship is reversed. Classical painters, aware of this, often cheated to correct it. An X-ray of the self-portrait in the National Gallery in London reveals that Rembrandt initially painted himself as he saw himself in the mirror, but later decided to erase the tools to avoid appearing left-handed. In later times, painters such as David, Manet, Van Gogh, and Cézanne stopped worrying about this inversion and painted themselves just as they appeared, with their left hand transformed into a right hand holding the palette. In Rembrandt's self-portrait, the face turned toward the viewer is usually illuminated from the left side. Two notable exceptions are the self-portraits in Washington and Cologne. Rembrandt used a uniform underpainting of medium brightness and a reddish tone, which shows through in certain areas. His technique involves starting with a light sketch in half-tone, then layering the darker tones in thin washes, followed by the lighter tones in thicker layers. He would finish by adding the brightest highlights and reflections, typically with the most heavily textured paint. From his earlier self-portraits in 1629, his brushwork is visible. The curls of his hair are suggested by small curves drawn with the end of the brush handle on the wet paint, allowing the reddish ground beneath to show through. This quick execution and apparent lack of finish displeased many of his contemporaries. Much of the face remains in shadow, going against the portrait conventions of the time. In these paintings, Rembrandt presents us with a stark, incomplete image, one that we must finish with our imagination. Rembrandt often attended auctions where he bought lots of old clothing, weapons, and hats. In his self-portraits, he appears in a variety of costumes. To some, this suggests an extravagant personality. However, these accessories and scenarios often have a deeper explanation. The painter portrayed himself several times wearing armor, a ruff, or a helmet. These items could symbolize patriotism, as the United Provinces of the Netherlands had recently won their independence from Spain. Moreover, Minerva, the goddess of war, often depicted with armor and a helmet, gradually replaced Saint Luke as the patron of painters. The depiction of metallic surfaces with their reflections was an opportunity for the painter to showcase his technical skill. Ultimately, the armor becomes a symbol of the fragility of glory. Rembrandt often wears a cap or beret, derived from the academic cap. This type of headwear is associated with artists and their free-spirited lives. It appears in a print by Lucas van Leyden, which may be a self-portrait that inspired Rembrandt. Metaphorically, the beret can represent artistic genius. The gold chain, on the other hand, was traditionally a reward given by a sovereign to a painter. Titian received one from Charles V, Vasari from Pope Pius V, and Rubens from 3 different rulers. Rembrandt painted himself with several gold chains, but this was pure fiction. He never received any from a sovereign. Nevertheless, the yellow metal with its shimmering reflections was also a demonstration of painterly virtuosity. In addition, gold serves as a subtle reminder of the vanity of wealth. In his early years, Rembrandt portrayed himself in his Leiden studio, standing before a wooden panel set on an easel. However, from 1652 onward, he no longer depicted himself as an artist. In his painted self-portraits, one of the most frequently worn garments is a loose, open-collared smock tied with a belt, his work attire. We see him wearing this outfit in a series of etchings where he appears leaning out of a window, drawing. While his contemporaries often portrayed themselves as refined and elegantly dressed, Rembrandt shows himself at work without affectation. Instead of appearing groomed, he looks disheveled, with shapeless turbans on his head. In the painting at the Louvre, the palette and the support stick are, along with his face, the only elements that emerge from the shadows. In the painting at Kenwood House, the same tools appear. The circular arcs in the background of the latter have sparked much speculation. Kabbalistic symbols, attributes of divine perfection, a representation of art itself, or simply a display of the artist's virtuosity, the ability to draw a perfect circle by hand. Perhaps it is merely the sketch of a map of the world, like those often seen in 17th century Dutch painting. For the aging painter, it might have been a way to express his awareness of universality, or perhaps another subtle reminder of the vanity of the world. In his later years, Rembrandt painted himself as Saint Paul, a saint identified by the scriptures and the sword that pierces his cloak. Paul was the main source of inspiration for the theologians of the Reformation, as he defended justification by grace. One of Rembrandt's most enigmatic paintings is the one in Cologne. In it, the artist portrays himself looking much older than in other portraits from the same period, with a mocking smile on his face. A silhouette can be seen on the left. However, the canvas was cropped and repainted in certain areas. An X-ray reveals a right hand holding a brush, which was later painted over. Thanks to a painting made 20 years later by one of Rembrandt's disciples, the scene can be better understood. It is possible that it represents an episode from the legendary life of the ancient artist Zeuxis. According to legend, Zeuxis died of laughter while painting a comically ugly old woman, hence the amused expression in Rembrandt's painting. Rembrandt was sometimes accused of painting ugly figures in dark, somber worlds. His choice to depict himself as much older, as a gesturing old man, may have been a way to defend his originality. The allegory is clear. In the face of old age and death, all painters are equal. The contemplation of his own face, in Rembrandt's case, becomes a meditation on illusion and the vanity of the flesh. As a young man, he experimented on himself with the expression of emotions. His series of self-portraits documents the transformation of his face: abundant curly hair in youth, a broad nose and full face in maturity, a mouth often slightly open, as if struggling to breathe. Rembrandt knew he was not conventionally handsome. He observed the ravages of time on his own face, from disheveled adolescence to triumphant maturity, and from maturity to the sorrowful decrepitude of old age. Work, sleepless nights of study, financial struggles, and family misfortunes painted dark circles under his eyes, etched wrinkles, and sculpted his features. These metaphors from everyday language are drawn from the vocabulary of art. Time works like an artist on the human face. His series of self-portraits is as rigorous as an anatomy lesson. In his painted self-portraits, Rembrandt often has eyes sunk into shadow, which in his time was seen as a sign of a troubled and contemplative spirit. His impassive face reflects introspection, doubt, solitude, lucid wakefulness, and disillusionment. In this obsessive repetition, we see a tormented figure, one marked by the end of the European Renaissance and by melancholy. I hope you enjoyed this video and that it helped you gain a better understanding of Rembrandt's famous series of self-portraits. I'd love to read your thoughts in the comments, and if there's anything you'd like to add that I didn't mention in the video, feel free to share it there as well. Don't forget to leave a like and check out the link in the description where you'll find a collection of Rembrandt's best works, along with many other artists, so you can collect your favorite painting. On the website, you can purchase the artwork you love the most, in the finish you prefer, and the size you need. Shipping is completely free worldwide, and by purchasing, you'll be supporting me so I can continue creating videos like this one. You'll find a link in the description to place your order. Thank you so much for your support, and I'll see you in the next video.